Hello, Bible readers. Psalm 2 and Psalm 1 are bookended with a beatitude on either end. Happy are all who take refuge in him, are the final words of Psalm 2. Psalm 1 started, Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, but delight in the law of the Lord. Psalm 1, you remember, is a psalm of orientation that gives thanks for everything working like it should. And a big part of all the functionality of everything the psalmist knows is rooted in God's law, the Torah, a gift from God telling people how life is best lived. And in exchange for that Torah gift, God's people give obedience. It's a give relationship. They follow the law, but they don't follow with frown faces. They take delight in Torah living. So I ended Psalm 1's post with its deepest meaning, that life, like with a capital L, is not self-determined, but is best lived when one finds a home in God's teaching. Psalm 1 and Psalm 2 are meant to be read together. They function together with these bookend beatitudes. And as much as the first psalm is an orientation psalm addressed to individuals, the second psalm is an orientation psalm addressed to nations. The stage is set with the first three verses. Vassal nations are considering whether now might be the time to revolt, because the perfect time for that is during a transition from one leader to the next, or maybe in the new leader's very first months, right? Now, this isn't necessarily, the context for this isn't necessarily a specific historical situation. It's a scenario where, like, what if vassal nations were plotting to challenge a new leader? Let's test a new king. By the way, have you ever really thought about how did kings or queens have any moral authority? Like, as people who live in a democracy, our leaders get to rule because they got more votes than the other person. Why do you get to be in charge? More people voted for me. But in other political systems, a leader might get to lead because they deposed the old leadership, like a mob boss becomes the boss by killing off rivals. A king oftentimes becomes king by killing his brothers and anybody else that wanted to rule. But it's not only strength that can gain authority or take power. Moral leadership can work too. Mahatma Gandhi never held office of any kind, but he certainly was the greatest political force of his generation in India. His authority came from something greater than votes or violence. It came from wisdom and authenticity and compassion and persistence. So back when Israel had kings, the culture, the society that was Israel, had to make sense of why does this person get to be in charge? And what does it mean that this person is in charge? I'm taking a moment on this because there's going to be a lot of psalms that we will call enthronement psalms. These were psalms likely used during coronation festivities of a new king. Maybe you saw recently when King Charles III was coronated in the United Kingdom. Everything about that ceremony is meant to communicate the justification of why him, why a king at all. From what he wears to where he sits to where it happens, the whole event is one big propaganda moment to help everybody agree this is the right way to do things. This is the person who should be in charge. In ancient Israel, the idea is, the theology is, that God is king. God is creator, deliverer, ruler of all. And an earthly king is chosen by God, not to take God's place, but to represent God in ruling over the people of Jerusalem and in speaking to them. Kings of Israel also represent the people before God, and so they're kind of mediators. The emphasis in Psalm 2 is that the king is God's chosen one. This is not some random person. God chose this person, so don't mess. That's the message. So after setting the stage with these vassal nations looking for the right moment to take on God's king, In verses 4 to 6, God laughs, kind of like a trash-talking basketball player who wants to put an up-and-comer in their place. Like, oh, like, don't. Just don't. In verses 7 to 9, the king himself, not God, but the king, the chosen one, takes the floor and speaks and says, I'll tell you what God decrees. He said to me, you are my son. I will make the nations your heritage. You shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Like, this is a mic drop moment for the new king. At an actual enthronement ceremony, likely, because we do not have video recorded evidence of this, but likely the new king, would read this part, these verses, and then somebody else would say the last few verses, which basically say, so other kings, be wise, serve the Lord with fear, kiss his feet, or he'll be angry, and you'll perish. The theme that a nation's leaders are God-chosen still means something today, even in a democracy. Martin Luther had to think a lot about this idea 500 years ago, and wrote a lot about it, actually. It's all rooted in trying to legitimate why one person gets to have power over many persons. Who put you in charge? Psalm 2's answer is, God did. Like the first psalm, and it makes perfect sense since they would be read together, Psalm 2 is a psalm that is certain. There is no ambiguity. There are no exceptions for when it might be okay to be a conscientious objector of the king's decisions. Protests of freedom of speech. Psalm 2 is not thinking about nuance or gray areas. Psalm 2 offers the gifts that come with assurance. That when a new leader steps in, trust that God chose this person. More nuance will come in later psalms. But for this one, at an enthronement, you should at least start there, right? I am one with my God. My God is with us, all of us, at all times and in all places.